Hello and welcome to a special playoff edition of Establish the Edge. My name is Adam Levitan here of Establish the Run, joined by the Establish the Edge regulars Michael Leone, Pat Kerrane, joined by the man you all know and love, Evan Walters, aka Evan Silva. On tonight's show, we will be talking about the playoffs from a macro perspective. In other words, how we expect the playoffs to go, how many games we expect each team to play, because when you're playing these fantasy contests, that is among the most important things to think about. And then we'll get into strategy that we think for each of the contests, FFPC, NFFC, Underdog. We'll do it all. Leone, how you doing tonight, buddy? I see you have the Bills jersey on once again.
Yeah, I got the Steve Tasker Bills jersey. I'm pretty pumped for the playoffs. I'm putting up right now the implied probabilities for each team to make the Super Bowl according to DraftKings Sportsbook. And for the Establish the Run projections to do our expected games, we use kind of a combination of this and 538 as their odds. This is what the expected games would look like if you solely used 538. So we used a combination of those two on site. You can kind of see there's some value in the NFC in games played because New Orleans and Tampa Bay have decent odds to make it to the Super Bowl and are in the wild card round.
Sure. Obviously odds to play 4 games, and obviously Kansas City and Green Bay have no shot to play 4 games. That's all interesting, Leone, but the better question is, will you be jumping off of a van onto a burning table on Saturday morning before the Bills game?
Oh man, Saturday at 1 was a tough time slot for me. You know, the first game of lock for the weekend slate for all the playoff contests. I wish we were a different time slot. I could have gone a little crazier pregame.
Yeah, not the best time slot for the Bills. All right, the other member of the Establish the Edge podcast, Pat Kerrane. You know him from the Dynasty rankings. You know him from grinding season-long stuff. You know him, I believe, from winning, what was that, the Engage 8 you won on DK also this year. Kerrane, quite a season for you. What's going on?
Not too much. I always get very excited about these playoff tournaments, the FFPC one. I just did my first Underdog Gauntlet draft before the show, so excited about talking playoffs.
All right, and the man you all know and love, Evan Silva, is coming off of his final regular season matchups column. He just informed us he's been sleeping for the last day and a half in recovery from the Week 17 matchups column. Evan, I mean, been piping hot with the overs on team totals, especially the Deshaun Watson one. How you feeling, buddy? What's going on?
Doing well. Didn't have as good of a Week 17 as you did. Adam Levitan, GPP God, GPP bro.
Yeah.
But, definitely hope – I think I carried my weight. And we had an awesome Week 17 as a company. And I was really glad to see all the people, that profited from that. But I don't know. I'm excited to shoot the shit with you guys. Leone, though, I have a specific question from you as the soulless spreadsheeter among the group. Mm-hmm. If you could pick one team right now to put some money on as like a longer shot, it doesn't have to be a super long shot. Hopefully just middle shot to longer shot as a team to win it all right now. Who would it be?
For me, it would be – so it's the same team that I told people to take in the regular season at 22-1. It's Baltimore. I think Baltimore here, what are they, 6th in odds here to make the Super Bowl or 7th? I like Baltimore as the long shot. I think they're 14-1 or so to win the Super Bowl. So if you got them when I touted it in the regular season at 22-1, we're going to claim closing line value just like we did with the Dolphins last week. Despite the end result there, we got our closing line value. But I don't know. I think they lead the NFL in point differential, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm pretty in on Baltimore. I know it's been a rocky road for them this year, but I think they're going to come together at the right time. Whereas last year, they just ran so pure in the regular season, and then they, didn't come that very first playoff game. It's sort of the opposite for them this year.
I like that. On DK Sportsbook, I think they're 12-1 right now. And I think Tampa Bay or DK Sportsbook, I think they're 11-1, and Tampa Bay is 10-1. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the range that I would be looking at if you're looking for a team that, has some decent odds, that can provide you with some decent value, that has enough talent to win it all, to run the table.
You guys left off my favorite one. I'm looking in the NFC for longer shots where you don't have to go through Kansas City or Buffalo and Seattle. I mean, if you would have told me that you could get Seattle at 14 to 1 to win it all. And I believe 6 to 1 to win the NFC. I actually like that a little bit better. I mean, I understand that Russ has not been as good in the second half. Offense has sputtered, but the defense has been so much better. And yeah, you can say they haven't played any quarterbacks, but they're going to start off with either Goff or if you're John Walford, and so get some momentum from there. I think the Seahawks have a really good chance.
And I think the way to approach these is to just like pick like 2 or 3 teams, you know, and I don't know, put $100 or whatever you feel comfortable putting on it, and you know, giving yourself some leverage there with like, you know, some longer range odds.
Yeah. Okay.
The Seahawks remind me a little bit of the Chiefs last year, where everyone was on the Ravens because of how they closed the regular season, and the Chiefs were kind of just mundane, you know. So if you're fading the recency bias, I definitely get the Seattle pick.
Oh yeah. Okay. If you guys haven't subscribed to Establish the Edge, it is free. It is on iTunes. It is Leone and Kerrane for people like not necessarily your home league fantasy strat. For if you're looking to take your game up and play in some of these higher stakes online leagues, the stuff like FFPC 350s or the main events and stuff like that. They talk about strategy for those. They talk about overarching strategy for stuff like diversification across your portfolio, correlation, uncertainty, and how it applies to all kinds of different fantasy football related things, DFS, and also high stakes, dynasty, et cetera, et cetera. So go ahead, find them on iTunes. Part of the Establish. We're so professional here. We actually have a podcast network, and Establish the Edge is part of the podcast network. Okay. Let's start off here with our games played projections. Leone, how would you say people should use these? They do not have to completely use our games played projections. I think if people have a hot take, if you want to say, hey, I think the Colts beat the Bills in round 1, you can mess with that in your head. But the way we have it is market based. So tell people a little bit more about exactly how we came up with these games played projections.
Yeah, so we came up with them using a combination, again, of the DraftKings implied probabilities of making it to the Super Bowl, kind of mixing those with 538's probability outcomes, which they stray from the market a little bit. So we were able to tie it to the market a bit more using the DraftKings implied odds. And as you see, I've got our playoff fantasy rankings and projections on quarterbacks. You can see the expected games by team. And the new format really changes the playoff contest for fantasy this year quite a bit, because not only do you have an extra team in the playoffs, but eliminating that bye is like low key really big, because the 2 seed now, and in both conferences, the 2 seed's pretty good. In Buffalo in the AFC and New Orleans in the NFC, they have a chance to play 4 games, whereas the teams with a bye obviously are capped at 3. Now, they've always been capped at 3, but it was less of an issue when there was a pretty good chance one of the 2 teams in each conference with a bye was going to make the Super Bowl. You didn't think about it as much. I think you need to think about it a little bit more. And you can see the top 3 teams we have in expected games are New Orleans, Buffalo, and Tampa Bay before you get into Kansas City and Green Bay, the teams with a bye. It's hard, but obviously when you actually play in these contests, teams can't play partial games. We're projecting partial games. That's not going to happen. Justin Herzig, new contributor for us at ETR, wrote a really good article and pointed this out in his Underdog Strategy article. You do kind of want to keep a bracket in mind because, again, you can't play partial games. You know, New Orleans is either going to play 3 or 2. They're not going to play 2.6. So I like to think of the expected games and our projected points that are derived from that as, you know, try not to get so micro that you're thinking they're going to score exactly this amount of points, because that's wrong, but they sort of represent the strength of the bet of each play, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Kerrane, when you're actually drafting and implementing this expected game stuff, how do you think through what we have here for projected games versus how you would execute something in a contest?
Yeah, I think you need to be mindful of, like, when you're selecting a player, you're betting on that team to advance in most cases. And so, you know, that like 2.5 becomes a 3 or whatever it is. So you can't get too married to those projected games played or the projections overall. You have to be scenario based, where you're looking at you almost want to, like in the FFPC contest, you almost want to like create a bracket of how you think the playoffs are going to go and build your team around that, rather than just kind of slotting in highly projected guys.
Okay, so a huge key to this is going to be projecting not just what we have here, which is kind of market-based and mean-based, but if you have a hot take, it can go a long way. If you think the Ravens end up playing 4 games, make the Super Bowl. If you think the Bucks end up playing 4 games and you build your teams like that, there's going to be a ton of upside there. Evan, any hot takes for the people, maybe some teams that are playing this week with legit chances to go to the Super Bowl? I know I said Seattle. Anybody you really like that can maybe play 4 games?
No, I think that what Kerrane kind of alluded to there was really, is really smart, because, I think that if you don't necessarily have to have a hot take, but you can build a bracket and your picks around a hot take that, hey, if you get that hot take right, whether or not you believe in it, it can be contrarian. It could be, just something that, you think just might happen. And you get it all right, which, I mean, at the end of the day, like, there's very little margin for error in the FFPC playoff challenge contest. Like you have to nail everything almost, or like, last year you have to nail Raheem Mostert and Damian Williams. Like you needed like both of those guys in all likelihood, So it doesn't even necessarily have to be, a hot take that you believe in. It can just be a hot take that you build your team around. And I'm with Kerrane that I think that's probably the best way to construct a team.
Sure. Leone and Kerrane, you want to throw out any hot takes on exact teams you think that have a real good chance to play 4 games that are playing this weekend?
I threw out my Baltimore pick as a long shot for the Super Bowl, so I'll stick with them as far as fantasy. I think Lamar Jackson could go undervalued. The thing that's tough with Lamar is his teammates aren't really highly thought of. So sometimes in contests where you have to pick a Raven, they'll gravitate to Lamar. But in contests where you don't necessarily have to pick a Raven, I could see Lamar being pretty undervalued by the market.
Yeah. And I like the Seattle call. I don't think that people will be all that excited to play DK Metcalf in round 1 because the cornerback matchup. And I think the way the FFPC contest works, there might be some incentive to push towards Chris Carson just because there's not that many running backs to choose from. So especially if you like even Russell Wilson or DK Metcalf, you want to play the passing game on Seattle and hope that revives and leads them to a 4-game run. I like that.
All right. Leone, why don't we run through some of the injury assumptions that we have right now and if you guys go to the site, you can find our projections, our rankings for various formats. Leone's brought up our generic rankings and projections. One of the biggest things that we're watching is Alvin Kamara's status. Alvin Kamara obviously missed week 17 because he's on the COVID list. I think he's going to get cleared, but I don't know for sure. We have him assumed in right now. Tell the people what we have on Mike Evans, Beasley, CEH, Goff as assumptions right now, Leone.
Yeah, for the most part, we've assumed guys in, thinking they're going to push to play come playoff time. I guess Evans was at walkthrough in practice today, so it's kind of a good sign, but also doesn't mean all that much. But we're projecting him in. Beasley, I'm somewhat concerned about because they keep using this week-to-week term on him, but we have him projected in. If you're playing in Underdog or you want a tournament where you want like a unique player, Isaiah McKenzie probably fills in for the slot for Beasley if Beasley's out. So that's an interesting one, but we don't have him projected for much work because we're assuming Beasley in. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, we're assuming comes back in the divisional round when they play. It was high ankle sprain. So initially it was like pretty iffy. And he had like that along with another injury, but sounds like he's going to be back, but we're somewhat cautious on the workload with him. You could make a case that he'll get an even higher workload than we're expecting. Then Goff, we're expecting out. The comments haven't been great. I think they're going to go with Wolford round 1. And then we're outside of round 1, we're expecting kind of a split between Goff and Wolford just because we're unsure when he's going to be back. I think there's just no upside in taking Goff really in any of the playoff formats. And then the Browns situation, I guess, is one to keep an eye on with the COVID stuff. They're without an offensive lineman. They're without their head coach. Yeah. So we'll keep an eye on that. I think that's most of them. Do want to note too, Michael Thomas returns from IR. This has sort of been the plan for them was, hey, get rest, get healthy. You're going to come back week 1. And I think Michael Thomas, as far as undervalued studs, might be the most undervalued of all the studs.
Yeah, and when we did the show with Underhill, he made the point that that's exactly what the Saints were doing. Michael Thomas probably could have played week 15, 16, 17. They just decided to hold him out. Evan, has Underhill said anything to you about the Kamara situation? He was on it.
Texted him. I don't know. He hasn't been responding lately. I don't know if we had a falling out or what. But because
He had good info on Ty Montgomery though. That was
he
good.
did. Oh, and I don't know if you were following him on Twitter at the time, but he took several victory laps on Ty Montgomery. He dunked on fantasy football Twitter. I mean, and then I woke up this morning, for a little bit, and I had a text from him, and he was asking me about fantasy football advice for his playoff fantasy league. He was like, "I got to take down that motherfucker Barnwell." So. No, but he we'll see if he has anything to say. I wanted to suggest though that maybe there's a possibility that there's been a little overcorrection in the direction of the Steelers and away from the Browns based on this COVID stuff. Which I obviously I know that it's not good, and I love Kevin Stefanski and Olivier Vernon especially is a very big loss for them. He wasn't COVID though; he tore his Achilles. But they lost one offensive lineman. Joel Bitonio is a stud, but they have 4 other stud offensive linemen, and they also have some pretty good depth on the offensive line. And the line moved like 3 points today in the Steelers' direction. I wanted to suggest that that everyone is overcorrecting for what happened today.
Oh, I think the Browns can win for sure. I mean, this Steelers offense for the last month, 6 weeks has been like borderline inept.
Right.
Can't run the football. Ben can't throw the ball downfield. It's just like it's been an absolute mess. So yeah, I think the Browns can win for sure as well. Any other team or player based takes before we get into the actual formats here? All right, let's go to Underdog. I think Underdog, out of the 3 that we're going to talk about tonight, is the most interesting and deepest and most complicated and thoughtful, and the place where really we can generate the biggest edge. Leone, why don't you explain to the people the Underdog contest and what makes it kind of the deepest and most complicated?
Yeah, first off, if you subscribe to ETR, definitely make sure you check out Justin Herzig's article. I read that before I drafted any teams, and I was really glad I did because I think I would have drafted some negative expected value teams. It's a best ball format. You start a quarterback, 1 running back, 2 wide receiver, tight end. They're grouped together, and then 1 flex spot. And you also have 5 bench spots. So you have 10 players all together that you're going to draft. Best ball format sounds really simple, but if you're playing the big tournament they have, it's somewhat complex actually, because you have to think through that. To advance, you have to win each week, and your points don't roll over. It starts fresh each week. So you need to organize things so you have a full roster essentially each week of the entire playoffs. And we talked about making sure you think through a bracket. Pat mentioned doing that for FFPC, and a lot of these other formats, it's way more important than it is even for FFPC to have a scenario in mind. And sometimes on the fly when you're drafting, you sort of just create this scenario because you really want to be stacking heavily and make sure you're covered through the playoff rounds. What I've been doing essentially is having one team I really like from one of the 2 conferences. I'll stack them, assume they go to the Super Bowl, and then stack 2 teams from the other conference that I think could give me a chance, one of those 2 teams, and making sure you're covering the wild card round. I can throw up like one of the drafts I did.
I mean, the thing is, like, people are going to go into this Underdog thing if you're not thinking about it, and maybe you draft all players from the Chiefs and the Packers and you think you smashed, you have no chance because you're not going to advance out of round 1. You know what I mean? So, like, you have to have guys from the wild card round. Kerrane, have you played any of these Underdog ones? You had any general thoughts on the Underdog contest?
Yeah, I just did one before we went live, and the thing that jumped out to me, Justin mentions in his article, like, you can't lock yourself out at like quarterback and running back, for example. Like, let's say you were to take Lamar Jackson and then you didn't take any of the Baltimore running backs, and then you only drafted running backs in the AFC. You're screwed come the Super Bowl, because you will only have, you'll either not have Lamar Jackson or you won't have a running back and you won't win the entire tournament. So you need to be conscientious of like where your Super Bowl lineup is coming from and making sure that's paired up. But I mentioned Lamar Jackson because that's who I took in the one I did. And I did find it pretty easy to stack up Baltimore. Yes. Lamar Jackson's expensive, but basically every other person of note on that team is not. And so you can do like a Baltimore one slot pretty easily.
And that's because, guys like Levitan have been just, shitting all over Marquis Brown for his nickname Hollywood, but, didn't even realize it was just because that's where Marquis Brown was born. Hollywood, Florida.
Florida,
so that gives us an edge. That gives us an edge.
I'm not backing down. I'm calling him Burbank Brown for the rest of his life. I don't care. I don't care if it's Hollywood, Florida. Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about underdog strat, Leone. How much from each position are we talking about? Or should we be favoring wide receivers and tight ends? I think you can do some different flexible things. Obviously, in a lot of these formats, I always lean towards more pass catchers, just creates a higher ceiling, obviously lower floor, but a higher ceiling. What do you think about positional strategy in this underdog stuff?
Yeah, I like taking a lot of wide receivers for the reasons you just said. It's sort of taking the hyper fragile or running back strategy and applying it to this playoff format where, get 1 or 2 running backs that can cover you for the 4 weeks. Hope they stay healthy. Hope those teams advance, and then load up on wide receiver / tight end because it's more variance, weekly volatility. You can smooth out that variance by just making up for it in terms of quantity. And also, if you look at the starting spots, you have to start 2 wide receiver tight end. You only start 1 running back. So you're maxed at 2 running backs, whereas you're maxed at 3 wide receivers. So the positional scarcity is a little higher on top of that. As far as quarterback, I've done 1 or 2. I definitely wouldn't do more than that because you want all those wide receiver tight ends. So if I get a guy like this team I have up here, I took Russ. If I have someone like Russ who's playing the wild card round, and that's the team I'm counting on going to the Super Bowl for sure, which that's my only NFC team on this team, then I'll roll 1 quarterback. I had another draft where I rolled 2 quarterbacks where the value on Tannehill just looked really good, and I had taken A.J. Brown early, but it certainly wasn't, a prerequisite to do that. It's honestly, like, the big part about this is constructing your team to make sure that it's possible that you're filling all your starting spots all the 4 weeks versus it is necessarily grabbing a ton of value. And as Pat noted, the prices on Baltimore are good. I stacked them even without Lamar as like my AFC team coming back on this Russ stack. Got Gus Edwards super light to give some security at running back for a second running back, but was able to go Mark Andrews and Marquis Brown back to back and picks 42 and 43. I mean, these are only 6-person drafts. So that's what, round 7?
Yeah. And so you're all in on Seattle making the Super Bowl if you do. And it's also one of Kansas City and Baltimore on the other side. You're going to have a really good team.
Yeah.
Evan, I'm not sure if you've done matchups yet, but I'm curious if you think there's merit to how well Tennessee has played Baltimore the last 2 times that they've been out. I mean, Tennessee has, it hasn't really been that close. I mean, they dominated Lamar. They played really well last 2 times. And one time was in the playoffs. One time was earlier this year. Do you think that is a trend? Do you think that's kind of fluky in the Tennessee versus Baltimore stuff?
No, I've been trying to catch up on sleep over the last day and a half, and I have not done any matchups. I have a bunch of notes, and I'm going to really get hard into it tonight and tomorrow and the next day. But I would lean toward no in terms of the BVP here. I mean, I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to write about it, and we'll discuss it. But and we'll discuss it on Thursday night. But I would lean toward no in terms of how big of an impact the BVP has here. Underhill says Kamara and Michael Thomas both ready to roll. So
let's go.
Let's ride.
Breaking news. Okay. I knew Goodell would never let Kamara not play. I mean, come on. He was going to pass the test for sure.
So people love to start with Allen and Mahomes at the start of these drafts, but if you start with Kamara, it's really not that hard to go Kamara, Michael Thomas, Breeze right off the bat. And then there's lots of late New Orleans guys you can tack on it. And then in the middle rounds,
Jared Cook, Callaway, Sanders. Yeah, that's interesting. And Leone, you have the Saints projected to play the most games out of any team in the playoffs.
Yeah.
So I mean, really they're going to beat the freaking Bears, right?
Yeah, you would think. Leone, this is a good time to bring up the DraftKings odds to lead the playoffs in rushing because, first of all, I think it illustrates kind of the positional scarcity. There's not that many running backs in great spots. Obviously the most likely outcome is Derrick Henry only plays 1 game. The most likely outcome is Jonathan Taylor only plays 1 game. I think the price here on Alvin Kamara is really interesting, especially now that we know he's likely to play on Wild Card Weekend. You can get Alvin Kamara at 10 to 1. I think that's really interesting. But just as a whole here, you can see it kind of illustrates running back is not deep in this playoff run. So it makes me even more likely to skew towards wide receiver. But yeah, I thought definitely an interesting price on Kamara to lead in rushing if you think he can get 4 games. And obviously, I think the Saints do have a pretty good chance to get 4
How
games.
about Kamara to lead all the playoffs in receiving at plus 4,000?
Yeah, that's a
Sprinkle
good. Yeah, I
sprinkle
like
a little
that.
bit. Let's sprinkle a little bit.
Evan's so happy that we're doing this on StreamYard instead of Zoom, so he can just fire while this is on.
Maybe that's a bad thing. Evan's gonna end up with a lot of exposure.
Oh, they're trying to put limits on me now.
Oh no, you're too sharp.
60 to 1 though. Both like Gus Edwards and Latavius Murray both at 60 to 1 on 2 teams that could play 4 games are mildly interesting if you want the super long shots.
All right, Kerrane, I got to bring up Ronald Jones. Ronald Jones is not a long shot to lead the playoffs in rushing. He's only plus 650 in this matchup. I don't think his ADP is that high, though. What do you think about Ronald Jones as like a one-off in some of this underdog stuff? And then there's other one-offs that are maybe available. I know Leone mentioned Chris Carson. I think there's other one-offs that are available. What do you think about the running back spot in these underdog drafts and your boy Rojo?
Yeah, this won't surprise you guys, but I kind of like Rojo in these. I mean, you've got an issue with Tampa Bay, especially if Evans is good to go, where you're kind of guessing at who's going to get all of the receiving touchdowns, at least on the ground. It should be consolidated through Rojo, and you could have a situation like we saw with San Francisco where they ride the running game a little bit to make a run through the playoffs. So there's certainly upside with him. The issue with Ronald Jones, I think, is that if Tampa Bay starts to lose, he's going to get scripted out. So I think if you're taking him in whatever format, you're betting on, at least 2-3 games from Tampa Bay. He's not going to score you many points in a loss.
Yeah, I think, obviously we don't expect Ronald Jones to have the pass down work. It'll go to one of LaShawn McCoy or Keyshawn Vaughn, but Tom Brady throws to Ronald Jones on early downs at such a high rate anyways that I think you still get the pass catching upside from Ronald Jones even on early downs. And again, as Kerrane said, you need them to be winning anyways. So hopefully there's not that many extreme passing situations where they're throwing the ball 30 times in the second half and stuff like that.
Yeah, and if you're subscribing, we have underdog specific rankings that take into account positional scarcity. You can see we have Rojo 14th. The ADP is 23. We got the ADP in there, and you can download, if you hit the CSV button, you can download them and upload them to Underdog as your default ranks in 2 seconds. Do you guys want to knock out a draft real quick? I don't know how long it would take these people when they want to see a live gauntlet draft.
That should be another show. We got so much to talk about, don't you think?
All right. No, I think you're right. So, sometimes they go in 5 minutes, but sometimes they
let's commit to doing a draft though. Let's do one.
Yeah, I'll do it.
I wanted to ask you guys about taking flyers. So this is something that Justin mentioned in his article, and I notice on Leone's teams he's got David Moore and Michael Pittman. And how much of a focus are you putting on getting these really low owned guys that, particularly you've got Russell Wilson on the David Moore team, so you're hoping they make the Super Bowl. And one of the things that Justin points out is if you get to the final round and you have a player that no one else has, that's a big advantage. How much focus are you putting on that?
Yeah, I'm not putting a ton of focus, but usually I just want to correlate my last spot anyways. This one was tough where I was torn between taking David Moore and correlating that or taking just a complete random one-off like T.Y. Hilton and having a better chance of getting out of round 1. So it was a pretty tough decision. I do have some weird guys at the ends of drafts. I'm trying to find another one. I know I took Miles Boykin on a team where I kind of got shut out of my Lamar stack. No one's going to play him. I do think it makes sense to correlate where if you get in that final round, it's going to be pretty thin rosters. If you just get a touchdown out of one of those guys, you could hit. And, not just being unique with specific players, but also teams. Justin pointed this out in the article, but Cleveland and the Colts, for example, if you're in a spot where you can't really get an AFC stack, the ADPs on those teams are pretty low. I mean, you can get Hilton and Pittman in the last 2 rounds, which that's what I did on my very first team I drafted. I wanted Jonathan Taylor, just good value running back early. I didn't have a running back. So at that point, I was like, well, I'll stack the Colts just in case as one of my 2 AFC teams. And I got Pittman and Hilton with literally my last 2 picks in the draft.
Yeah. I mean, you can see the edge that you can create in this underdog just through roster construction. There's going to be so many people out there blindly firing and not even thinking about, oh, do I have stacks that can actually play each other in the Super Bowl? And so, yeah, I think there's a really big edge to be had there in underdog. Anything else on underdog before we move on to FFPC?
No, I think we covered it pretty well. Just make sure you check out Justin's article on site.
All right. Yeah, by the way, if you guys haven't signed up, we are running a deal just for the rest of the season, aka the playoffs of the Super Bowl, $49.99. Leone, I don't know if you have the yes. Yes, we are super professional here. Leone popping up the promo code ROS 2020. Get the rest of the season for $49.99. Okay. FFPC. I think Kerrane is our resident FFPC dude, grinding like these main events and football guys against like 70-year-old dudes who are drafting running backs with like their first 8 picks. And of course, Kerrane comes at them with the 0 RB strategy and they lose their mind. but the low T 0 RB strategy on FFPC, I think, is quite effective. But anyways, playoff challenge. Tell the people, Kerrane, what do we need to know about the FFPC Playoff Challenge?
Yeah, so the Playoff Challenge, it's not a draft, unlike the gauntlet that we've been talking about. You're going to select your team at the very beginning before lock, and then that's your team through the whole contest. You can choose whoever you want, but you can only choose 1 player from each team to fill out a lineup of 12 players. It's quarterback, 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 1 tight end, kicker, defense, and then 4 flexes. So you're not going to pick 2 of the 14 teams. And then the only twist, other than the typical FFPC tight end premium scoring, is that the Super Bowl counts double.
Mm-hmm. Again, let me be very clear on this because it's kind of counterintuitive. You can only take 1 player from each team, and I believe there's 10 roster spots or 12.
There's 12 roster spots.
So there's 14 teams in the playoffs this year. 2 teams you're not going to have anybody represented.
And you have to do kicker research too.
You have to do kicker research as well. We do have that on the site. We have kicker rankings up on the site, so hopefully save you guys some of the kicker angst there. Leone, I'm curious how you think this plays into strategy, 1 player from each team. And there's also a lot of thought in here about being contrarian and what you can do there in a tournament this big. And it's so top heavy. I don't know if you can bring up the prizes, but it's like, I think it's like 125K to first and 25K to second or something like that.
I think that, yeah, you can see they have 2. They have a more expensive one and a less expensive one, but the more expensive one, almost half the prize goes in the grand prize, but a shot at $500,000, it's kind of a fun playoff one. The $35 one, it's more of like 25%, but it's still, it's still a super cheap, super steep prize pool here. I'm pulling it up now. But yeah, as far as only taking 1 player per each team, it does mess with your head a little bit as far as strategy, because there's 2 big things you got to think about in terms of strategy. What's the edge at the position that a player is creating? So Travis Kelce, for example, massive edge at tight end. It's tight end premium scoring. You have to play a tight end, unlike some of the other formats out there where tight end's wrapped in with wide receiver. Huge positional edge, but his team edge isn't as high as some other players because Patrick Mahomes is projected for more points. Tyreek Hill is projected for a similar amount of points. I mean, Travis Kelce is still an amazing play in this format, but there are 2 aspects to think about there. And when Pat talks about having a scenario in mind too, it's easier to get contrarian on the 1 player you take on a team if you think that team bounces early. If everyone's going to take Derrick Henry, and you want to play A.J. Brown, you're probably playing them to lose because A.J. Brown can easily outscore Derrick Henry in a single game. But if they play multiple games, then the odds of that happening start to shrink with each additional game.
Mm-hmm.
So the best approach, I think, is like to play, multiple teams and, 3 or 4 teams and just build each team around a specific, bracket prediction, right? So you sit down with your buddies and you're like, hey, let's make a prediction regarding the entire playoff bracket and then build our team around that. And then let's make another team based on another bracket prediction.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you can project who's going to be in the Super Bowl and who's going to get to play 3 or 4 games, you would obviously use the highest scoring player from that team. It's an interesting concept though, of like punting. Like if you think the football team has 0% chance of winning against the Bucs, which I don't actually think they do have a chance to win. But anyways, you would not take anyone from their team. I guess the format, they didn't change it this year. It would normally be you have to take someone from every single team. But anyways, Kerrane, what else about the strategy are you thinking about when you're drafting these FFPC teams?
Well, what Evan said about like crafting the bracket and then building it around that, I think is right. But you want to also think about like, okay, if I'm going to bet on the Bears to win in round 1 and be super contrarian, I don't want to like fade New Orleans and take Cole Kmet. You need to like take an engine of the Bears actually winning that game and going on a run. At that point, you probably do want to take Allen Robinson, David Montgomery, or the Titans, for example. If you're betting on them to make a run, you do want to take Derrick Henry like we saw last year. They're going to get rolling through Derrick Henry. A.J. Brown, I think you probably want to pair maybe even with Lamar Jackson, and you're betting on a loss like Leone said. So you want to figure out who you think is going to win each game, but you also want to think a little bit about how those games might play out and the game scripts that you're thinking about.
Yeah, I brought up the winner from last year, courtesy of Fantasy Mojo, and you can see where you can get contrarian. I know last year I had a tough time with this because I felt like kind of some of the spots where you wanted to kind of keep it straight and play chalk actually didn't come to fruition. One was playing Lamar at quarterback. People got Mahomes at 15%, which was phenomenal. He was in the winning roster, the optimal lineup. But one of the weird random ones was, Mostert ends up being the optimal San Francisco player. And if you remember last year, it was really difficult to not play George Kittle in the playoff contest. And it's kind of nuts if that in a tight end premium where you have to start a tight end, that Kittle and Kelsey both made the Super Bowl and neither of them were in either the winning lineup or the perfect lineup. Like that's pretty wild. And I don't want people to get the wrong idea and think they can do insane things that are stupid, but there is room to get off the board with a couple of tweaks.
Yeah, this is where my mind starts to really get bent on these things, because in this one specifically, you have to think really about being contrarian, right? I mean, am I misreading this where I'm thinking that this is kind of like a DFS tournament where we're trying to be as contrarian as we can without being stupid, or am I misreading this contest?
No, you do want to be contrarian. Like the most popular lineup last year was entered in the tournament 95 times. So like people aren't afraid of chalk to a fault. And the top 5 chalky players, the most chalky of which was Kittle, who came in at 77% owned. None of those top 5 owned players were in the winning lineup. So, to Mike's point, it was kind of a contrarian dream last season. It's probably not going to happen again this year that it'll be so contrarian, but you do need to get off the board, or at least off the mega chalk. However, I don't think you want to just like start taking kind of thin plays here. You still want to be taking pretty strong fantasy plays. John Jackson had an article I was reading where he's looking at, taking like backups. Those types of guys are not going to be strong picks typically. So you do want to kind of stay in the lane in terms of selecting high quality fantasy players, but you can still get pretty contrarian while doing that because the chalk really condenses here. Like I think, Alvin Kamara, Travis Kelce, Devontae Adams, they'll all be 60+% owned.
Here's a question that sucks, but I think is still very relevant, is that how do you want to treat your kicker selection? Like, because, they're a kicker, maybe you would, try to, theoretically like select them for a team that that might get kicked out early, except though that, hey, if kicker like goes off throughout the playoffs and, is scoring double-digit points every single week, like how do you treat your kicker selection?
I think generally you want to treat your kicker selection like you're fading that team. I call the kicker and defense selections like soft fades. You have to hard fade 2 teams where you're not selecting any players at all. Then you have kicker and defense where you're sort of soft fading the teams, but there's more margin for error at kicker than at defense. You need to get the kicker selection right. That's almost a third team you're not really selecting. If you have your team with a kicker win a game and go to the next round, you could still be okay. It's not an ideal situation because generally there's going to be a team with a player from that a team in the contest with a player from that team that outscores your kicker.
And when we get to the NFFC game strategy, that I think changes a little bit, which is interesting. So we'll bring that back up when we get to the NFFC game. But for subscribers, we have, Pat did ownership projections for all the players that we have. Here's like Alvin Kamara, for example, projected highest own at 69%. Another reason why I absolutely love Michael Thomas, where I think like the odds of MT outscoring Kamara is way higher than the ownership disparity here, regardless of how deep they go into the tournament.
Yeah, super valuable there. The ownership projections, again, we have them for every player, courtesy of Kerrane there for FFPC. Okay, what else on FFPC? Anything else you want to talk about FFPC before we get to NFFC?
Yeah, I guess, Pat, if you just have, a couple players you think make a lot of sense, or, we talk about going contrarian, like how would you go about doing that this year? Again, like last year, Mahomes over Lamar, Mostert over Kittle hit. Maybe some of those were sharp. Maybe some of those were lucky. Do you see any spots this year? I mentioned MT over Kamara. I think people are interested in that, particularly like at the quarterback position where Mahomes maybe gets, I guess the Kelsey ownership will keep Mahomes down, but it's an interesting year at quarterback as well.
Yeah, I think if I'm right about the ownership, then Michael Thomas is just going to be an awesome play. I think Travis Kelce's ownership could get even more out of hand than what I have it at. I have it at like 64%. Again, you look Kittle with it at 77% last year, in a year where you had Travis Kelce too, and Travis Kelce came in around 50% last season. It's possible people just jam Kelce, in which case Patrick Mahomes is really interesting and Tyreek Hill is really interesting if you can find a way to figure out tight end. I think the Cleveland passing game is pretty interesting if you want to try to do Jarvis Landry. To Evan's point, people are really afraid to take the Browns right now. I think they'll be a pretty heavily faded team. And so if you get 2 games out of a guy like Landry or even Chubb, who I think will be more popular, but still not probably as popular as he would have been, those are plays that kind of jump out to me. I think Marquis Brown is another one that I'll mention. He strikes me as someone who's
Hollywood Brown.
he could give. I know it's dangerous to bring up Marquis Brown on the show, but I'm going to do it. He could give you a best of both worlds situation where, like last year in the Ravens upset or the Titans upset in the Ravens, Brown was in the optimal lineup. So if that situation occurs where they have to throw a ton and lose, you could be okay. But then if they make a run, you've got the number 1 wide receiver on the team. So he's someone that I also think is pretty interesting.
Real quick, Leone. Underhill's texting me who should he take at number 7 overall? It's a best ball PPR. Josh Allen's off the board. Patrick Mahomes is off the board. Lamar Jackson's off the board. Alvin Kamara's off the board. Tyreek Hill, Tom Brady. Now he's up. Who should you take?
Steph Diggs.
Steph Diggs?
Yeah, Diggs or Aaron Jones. You said Kelsey's off the board?
No, Kelsey's not off the board.
I'd probably take Kelsey. Has he picked yet? How many teams is this?
No. 12?
I'd probably take Kelsey. I don't know. We can crowdsource. Kerrane, who would you pick?
I'd like Kelsey.
Who's in the mixer? Kelsey, Diggs, Adams, Rodgers.
Adams is still there?
Who is gone if all these guys are still alive?
I just read off the guys that are gone. Josh Allen, Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Alvin Kamara, Tyreek, Tom Brady.
Adams.
Adams?
Yeah, Adams.
Okay.
I wanted to give a player level take for a second here. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but Chase Claypool claimed that the Steelers didn't want him to hit the rookie wall, and therefore they were like rotating his snaps like in weeks like 13, 14, 15, stuff like that. And then he started to ramp up a little bit more towards the end, and now he expects to be full blast. Obviously, Ben Roethlisberger is going to come back for the playoffs. I just wanted to put it out there that I think Chase Claypool could return to a full-time role for the playoffs. I think that's at least interesting.
I'm all in. I was wondering what was going on with his snaps. It's so weird.
Yeah.
That's really exciting.
That's a good segue to the NFFC game because
I did want to mention one last thing,
okay.
which that I think the quarterback ownership is going to be kind of interesting. Josh Allen is both, I think, maybe going to be the highest owned quarterback, but also sort of interesting leverage off of Diggs, who will be really, really high owned just because there's not that many people to take on the Bills. So he's maybe going to be like pretty chalky, but also not bad chalk, or also chalk and leverage at the same time, maybe. But Tom Brady is someone that I think is a little in flux right now, where if we do get Evans playing and it looks like he's going to be totally healthy, then I'm thinking that might push ownership a little bit more to Brady, because it's going to be harder to pick the Tampa Bay receiver. If we don't get Evans and people can feel more confident about putting in like Chris Godwin or Antonio Brown, then I think Josh Allen's ownership might get a little bit nutty as people look for other options off of Brady. So
yeah,
that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah. Ownership projections get really complicated, man, when it comes to stuff like that, for sure. And obviously that's like stuff that I struggled with in DFS too, is adjusting to how injuries affect not that direct player situation, but how it affect the roster construction of every player as a whole. Okay, let's get to NFFC. NFFC is, well, I better let you guys explain, because quite frankly, I tried to read it and I was a little bit confused as to exactly what their rules are. So Leone, why don't you go ahead on the NFFC rules?
So the very start seems similar, but it gets crazier from there. So you're going to pick 12 roster spots, similar to FFPC. You're fading 2 teams. You're taking 12. You're starting with a max of 1 player per each team. Differences in scoring system. It's not tight end premium. Tight ends are lumped in with wide receivers. You get 6 points per passing touchdown and 1 point per 20 yards passing. So it's pretty favorable to passing quarterbacks. So that's the start. But what changes is your roster is not set for the whole playoffs. You make add drops throughout the playoffs. And as each week goes on, that increases the amount of players you can have for each team. So week 1, I can only have 1 Saint. Week 2, I can have 2 Saints. Week 3, I can have 3. And come the Super Bowl, if they're still in it, I can have 4 Saints. Additionally, how long you hold a player, they get a multiplier. So if I have Drew Brees, everyone in the first week scores, whatever their points are. But in week 2, if you have a player who is on your roster also in week 1, if this is the second week they've been on your roster without dropping them, they score 2 times their points, and then 3 times their points in week 3, and then 4 times their points in the Super Bowl. The multiplier always starts at 1x from the first week you pick them up, though. So if you pick someone up the Super Bowl week, they're only going to score 1 times their points. So that sounds complicated. It is a little bit complex. But it's like a really fun game, because you really got to plot out how you're doing your rosters to make sure you get the multipliers to round up. I was kind of like going galaxy brain with Pat on this in our chat. So I'll take a moment to breathe here after I ramble. But
hold on. I have a question. When I go to the waiver pool to pick somebody up, I can pick up anybody, or am I in a league with like 12 people, or who am I? I can just pick up anybody?
Anybody. You can pick up anybody, and you'll see kind of what the ownership percentages are for week 1. So you'll kind of have those in mind. So you can make tweaks sort of based on how you're doing if you want to pick up a chalkier player. But that's where you said Chase Claypool, like he's a high ceiling guy, can have these random spike weeks. There's a little bit more variance because, you might think Aaron Rodgers, for example, let's say you think Green Bay is going to go to the Super Bowl. You think Aaron Rodgers outscores Devontae Adams over the course of the playoffs. There's still some merit to starting with Devontae Adams in week 1, getting his multiplier started early, because wide receiver has more volatility. And come Super Bowl, if Adams has the big game and outscores Aaron Rodgers, he's getting 4x, and like you can make up a lot of points on the people that started with Rodgers. So there's definitely added variance, because it's not only how many points the players score, it's when they score those points.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this one's breaking my brain, and and it requires pickups to be made as the playoffs go along.
And I'll tell you what, Adam, if you're big on Seattle going the distance here, you could get Tyler Lockett at 40-1 to lead all the playoffs in receiving yards. So
yeah, the only problem with that is DK Metcalf actually pops into PSM, and Tyler Lockett does not. So no, I like that both for sure.
I tweeted out that they have averaged basically the same. They basically scored the same fantasy points over the course of the season, and people did not like that, probably because those people played Tyler Lockett and got like single digit games 10 times and missed the 45-point games.
Right. Okay, back to NFFC. Kerrane, how do you think about strategy in this NFFC one?
I haven't played this one. So, Leone, like, if we want to take Mahomes and Adams, like, to get their multiplier at 2x for their first game, do you just eat a 0 that first week?
Yes.
Okay.
So what I found really helpful is to almost build your roster backwards. Build the bracket, figure out who you want 4x in the Super Bowl, and back from there. And you can do it so you actually get 3 players from each of the 4 teams in the semifinals in the conference championship games, all having like 1x, 2x, 3x, if you construct it right. And then at that point, if you guess those 4 conference championship teams correctly, no matter who wins, you can get 1x, 2x, 3x, 4x in the Super Bowl. It's a little confusing, but if you work backwards, that's where I wanted to bring up Evan's kicker point. Normally you want to play a kicker and have them be on the team that loses round 1, right? But if you think the Saints are going to go to the Super Bowl and you start with Michael Thomas, you're going to want to add Alvin Kamara week 2. So there's actually room to be contrarian and say, well, I'm going to take Antonio Gibson week 1. No one's going to play him because they're going to lose. He has a very good game. They get bounced, but it doesn't matter because I want to replace him week 2 anyways with Alvin Kamara and get his multiplier started because I think they're going to go to the Super Bowl. So guys like Allen Robinson, Antonio Gibson, the Browns guys have additional value. And if you're wrong and those teams upset and Gibbs, let's say Washington wins and you have Gibson, well, that's not a bad thing, even though you didn't plan on it, because now you've got a really low owned player going at 2x in round 2, and you can kind of adjust what your plan was from the start, and you've got a lot of leverage on the field.
Are we eating zeros ever? Like to what Kerrane asked, can it ever be right to eat a 0 in week 1 so that we can get the 2x in week 2 with Devontae or Mahomes or something like that?
Well, you have to an extent because of the amount of players you have to take. Actually, I guess you don't have to because with all the teams playing round 1, you wouldn't have to, but I think you should unless you are fading. Unless you're fading, I guess, Kansas City and Green Bay losing, but you would rather. But think of it this way, though, Levitan. There are teams in week 1 who are going to lose, right? So let's say you take, I don't know, whoever you take, like they could lose and you got 1 extra points in week 1, but Tyreek Hill at receiver is going to score 2x right away in week 2. So he already makes up for his 0 over that guy that just played 1 game. And if you're replacing that guy who only played 1 game and adding someone, they start at 1x. So Tyreek Hill at 2x is better than 2 other guys at 1x, especially if Kansas City is going to keep advancing.
What do you think of, like, because to that point where teams are going to lose, and if you bet on a team to take a Super Bowl, you need that roster spot to clear up anyway. What about betting on like a game to shoot out where you're maybe ignoring another game, but you take, let's say, Marquis Brown and AJ Brown and just play that as a contrarian shootout script?
Yeah, that makes sense. And then you can dictate, your decisions the next round accordingly. That's a really good idea because then you get 2 guys that aren't going to be super owned that hopefully both do very well. One of them you're going to get 2x round 2, and one of them you're going to replace with the team you think is going to the Super Bowl. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
All right. Anything else on NFFC? Any other hot takes? Evan's just been over there firing on DK Sports.
I want some hot takes.
I've never been able to do a show and simultaneously just firing bets. While we're doing the show.
Kerrane and I being nerding it up. They're calling us fish. They want more Silva.
I told you I've been sleeping for the last day and a half, so I don't have that many great takes. I will on Thursday night though.
Yeah, Thursday night we will be doing
mad takes, son.
Establish the show. Me, Silva, and Wiggins will be talking about the playoffs through the lens of DFS, 2 3-game slates, and a 6-game slate. I'll probably be playing all 3 of those slates, even though it doesn't look like there'll be a lot of action on the 6-game. Usually in cash, there's still action. I know for the GPP bros, there's not a ton of action on some of those slates that are not featured as much. Also, Leone and Dink will be doing Establish a Million on Friday morning this week, so you'll have time to digest that. before lock at 1 p.m. on Monday. Also, by doing the show Friday morning, we allow Leone proper time to smash Natty Ices against his forehead before the Bills game on Saturday morning. Oh, God. Okay. If you're on YouTube.
Hey, Leone, like, just know that, you know, at least I can speak for Levitan and I, like, we are really on your side when it comes to, you know, the Bills, because we got a lot of hatred before the season. A lot of people came up and challenged and they lost.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know,
I was probably one of them.
You were. Actually, you were, now that I think about it. But yeah, no, it's good to be right. It's great to be right.
Yeah, you crushed it on the Allen stuff. And I really liked, you know, the way our rankings kind of came together. So I'm looking forward to next season. You know, the combination of me nerding it up and Evan with having the football guy insight. You know, guys like Allen, we had really high up in the rankings because it was tied to your top 150 and how convicted you were in that.
Yeah, exactly. And Evan and I will actually go back probably after the Super Bowl, and we'll go back through and look at all the takes we made before the season for a season long. Have one podcast where we go through all the misses, which will be painful, and then we'll go back and have a podcast where we go through all of the hits, which will, of course, be joyous. All right. If you haven't gotten on ETR yet, promo code rest of season 2020 for everything through what we do through the rest of the Super Bowl. If you're on YouTube, smash the like button. Don't just press it. You have to smash the like button, hit subscribe. That's going to do it for this playoff edition of Establish the Edge. Be sure you're subscribed to Establish the Edge. It is free with Leone and Kerrane. For Evan Walters, for Leone, for producer Leone, for Kerrane. I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.